My name is Mike. I'm a professor for social work management, and you are listening to Managing Around, the bi-weekly podcast about social science, culture, and management. Managing Around is part of the Talk About Organizations podcast network, a community resource and discussion platform for key ideas in management and organization studies, which is supported by our listeners.
Hi, and welcome to my podcast, Managing Around. In my latest introductory management course, I talked with my students about the adaptive leadership model. While drawing conclusions from a case study, Redskins No More, by Peter Northouse, we ended up in a discussion of a different kind of leadership. In these turbulent times, so was the thesis, there is no need for strong leaders that could solve virtually every problem. In the face of the many challenges ahead, leadership should not be misunderstood as a function or position, but as an activity that involves all key stakeholders associated with a problem. This is exactly what the adaptive leadership model wants to tell us, to bring about a paradigm shift in thinking of leadership. With other words, leadership does not mean to rule over the people, but to get them mobilized, solving together today's challenges in organizations and society. And in this and the next episode, we want to get a little bit to the bottom of the matter. We start today with a short introduction to the model of adaptive leadership before moving on to the question of what differentiates a so-called technical from an adaptive challenge. In the next episode, we will talk about the leadership behavior and the adaptive work itself. Eventually, we will assess the strengths and the weaknesses of this leadership model and conclude with its implications for the social work organization. Let's come to the first topic of today's episode. What is adaptive leadership? The adaptive leadership model has been developed by three Harvard academics, Heifetz, Krashow, and Linsky, in 2009, and has received great attention due to its support of organizations and professionals in mastering the so-called adaptive challenges. This model focuses on the adaptations required in people in response to changes which demand organizational learning, replacing existing management practices, and developing new skills and competencies. Furthermore, the model also deals with facilitating personal development through new situations and mobilizing staff to alter their behavior, values, and attitudes in uncertain times. This concept assumes a systematic perspective as it deals with the complex and multifaceted problems in our times. The model involves three phases of direction. First, identifying the problem. Second, developing a solution. And third, implementing changes. However, adaptive leadership is a complex leadership theory and describes a dynamic process and promotes problem solving and creativity. In this model, leadership is not regarded as a role, function, or position, but rather a continuous activity involving everyone within the organization. In other words, leadership practice is an activity to mobilize people to meet so-called adaptive challenges. This approach is not leader-centered, but follower-centered, and is dedicated to the interactions between followers and leaders. Accordingly, leaders need to be regarded in a broad context. Leaders are people who tackle problems in order to meet new opportunities and to deal with the inevitable changes in attitudes, behaviors, and belief systems. Adaptive leadership mobilizes everyone in the organization and prepares, empowers, and encourages them to change. Employees often take on responsibilities and challenges far beyond what is expected of them, and in doing so, are far from aligned with their so-called leaders. With other words, we must not confuse leadership with authority. This brings us to our second topic for today, the difference between technical and adaptive problems. Managerial decisions involve various possible situational challenges. Challenges and problems can either be technical or adaptive, or a combination of both. Technical problems that are clearly defined with known solutions can usually be implemented using the leader's existing expertise, standard operation procedures and rules, and authoritative decision-making. On the other hand, a so-called adaptive challenge is a gap between one's aspiration and the reality that demands a response outside the current known repertoire. In most situations, there are no clear-cut solutions available. Meeting adaptive challenges means meeting the gap between one's existing knowledge and one's desired future state. It requires leaders to encourage and empower others with their support to find a new way of thinking. For example, if a patient needs to stop smoking because of a disease, he or she needs to acquire a new set of priorities and habits. Adaptive challenges are often not just linked to the person but to the systemic context. This is why adaptive leaders also need to analyze stakeholders' interests and positions. As adaptive challenges demand learning from all people, leaders need to discover how people think and operate. Thus, solving problems involves the whole team and all relevant stakeholders. Meeting adaptive challenges requires another kind of attitude from staff. People with the problem are both the problem and the solution. And I quote from the book from Heifetz, 2009, page 79, an adaptive challenge requires people to distinguish between what is precious and essential and what is expandable within their culture. In cultural adaptation, the job is to take the best from history, leave behind that which is no longer servable, and through innovation learn ways to thrive in the new environment. End of quote. In other words, adaptive leadership can be done by accepting the harsh reality, dealing with employees' experiences of loss, and needs to be accompanied by the development of skills and competencies in staff. Whilst mobilizing employees in the process of adaptation and change, hard decisions have to be made and all employees have to be fully committed to the purpose of the organization. From a practical perspective, adaptive challenges can be identified by questions such as: what is the problem that is being ignored? What are the hopes and the fears of the people? What are the opportunities and risks associated with the challenge? What lessons need to be learned today? To summarize the key issues for today, the adaptive leadership model asks leaders to take a step back from the stage and to understand and reflect on the complexity of the adaptive changes. Leaders need to assess and distinguish between the technical and adaptive nature of the problems, for which authority, expertise, or a change of rules and procedures is necessary within an organization. Leaders' ability should also include dealing with distress, providing a supportive environment, giving direction, and focusing, encouraging, and empowering people. In other words, these are the competencies we strongly hope for in all organizations and in the society at large to bring about change. All right, that's it for today, dear listeners. I truly appreciate all your efforts to tune in my podcast for this episode. Please, if you liked this episode, don't forget subscribing to the podcast channel in your favorite podcast app, so you can stay up to date whenever a brand new episode of Managing Around is released. Stay safe, and we will see us on the next episode. Thank you for listening. Managing Around, the bi-weekly podcast about social science, culture, and management. Managing Around is part of the Talk About Organizations podcast network, a community resource and discussion platform for key ideas in management and organization studies, which is supported by our listeners. If you liked this episode, please leave a review on your favorite podcast website. There's also a link in the show notes. If you've got any thoughts on this episode, or if you've got any idea about new podcast topics or questions you'd like to discuss, send me an audio file or voice note to hi@profmanagement.de. For any non-audio comments, drop a tweet or DM to @profmanagement on Twitter or Instagram, please. For more information, visit my website www.profmanagement.de. Thank you for listening and see you next time.